And we are back with another episode of the Kyle Anslone Show. And I am very happy to be welcoming back to the show today my colleague at antiwar.com, the news editor over at the site, Dave DeCamp. Dave, how you doing today?
I'm good, Kyle. Thanks for having me. We're very busy these days.
Absolutely, Dave. I thought maybe me and you would get a little bit of rest over the last weekend of the holiday season, a chance to really get ready to kick off the new year. But unfortunately, Trump launched an attack on Venezuela, kidnapped the country's president, and it was actually a very busy weekend for antiwar.com. So, a lot I want to talk to you about today really all has to do with the fallout from the Maduro kidnapping, Trump's regime change, the Israeli connection, and is Cuba next? So, of course, I'm sure everybody's aware that on Saturday, the U.S. launched this early morning raid on Venezuela. They kidnapped Maduro. Dave, I'm just wondering, before we get into all of it, what do you make of the narrative that the Trump administration is putting forward that this was a very highly successful military operation? No Americans killed, just a couple lightly injured, about 80 dead Venezuelans, and Maduro was captured in such rapid fashion that there wasn't even like he didn't even get into his bunker. Does this seem right to you? Do you think there's any like real missing pieces to what happened over the weekend?
No, not really. I mean, it seems like that's what went down. We first started seeing U.S. airstrikes hit Caracas. They seemed like they were pretty heavy. And in the aftermath, it looks like a lot of targets have been struck. We still don't have an official death count from Venezuela, but the reports say at least 80 people were killed. I think the numbers probably could be higher. And it's surprising that the U.S. helicopters were able to get in there and not get shot down. Apparently, according to the U.S. military, one was hit. They did soften them up with a lot of airstrikes on air defenses. But I mean, shooting down a helicopter, I feel like that's something they would have been able to maybe achieve. So then, there's the question of some kind of stand down order from the Venezuelan military if people within the military cooperated with the U.S. It's hard to guess now because right now the picture that the Venezuelan government and military is putting out is that they're unified and that they want Maduro back. They sworn in the vice president as the interim president, and that's the message we're getting from all the military and government leaders in Venezuela. And we haven't seen any sort of, at least so far, no sort of reports of them closing ranks or, arresting people that they suspected were involved. So, the way I read it now is, there could have been some cooperation, because again, it's just surprising for them to be able to get in there and out like that. But it's just tough to know at what level. And, there's also reports that the U.S. was basically settled that Rodriguez would be fine to work with as long as Maduro was out of there. So that hints at potential collaboration with her. But again, with this big attack, it's hard to believe that she would go along with something like that. I think those reports were referring to some kind of deal where Maduro voluntarily stepped down, which of course he didn't do.
Right. Yeah, very interesting, Dave. So right after the attack, Trump goes in front of the nation and gives this address. And one of the most striking things he said is the U.S. is going to run Venezuela. So let's listen to Trump, and then I want your thoughts.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious because that's what we're all about. We want peace, liberty, and justice for the great people of Venezuela.
I mean, what do you think here? Trump is saying that we are staying in the country, and yet the Department of War says there's no U.S. soldiers on the ground. What is actually the U.S. plan for Venezuela now?
Yeah, it's tough to really know, but it was funny that morning, that this went down. You see people, Trump supporters online and everything, saying, "Oh, in and out, precision. It was the war's over in a few hours or an hour or whatever." And then Trump comes out and says, "Oh, we're actually going to run Venezuela to make sure a government that we like is installed after this. So what is the plan? I mean, it seems like right now, if we're to take Trump at his word, they're essentially threatening threatening another attack to try to get Rodriguez and the same government that's still in place to give in to all these demands that he's made. He's not just asking for U.S. access to Venezuela's oil. He's claiming that, it's America's oil and land that he's going to take back. According to reports and Trump himself, Maduro was ready to make a deal with him. According to Trump, he said he was ready to hand over everything. And Maduro did make it clear in his public comments and things that he was ready to work with Trump. He was still accepting the deportation flights. So I don't know what Rodriguez could really do beyond that. And is that going to please Trump here? Are they just going to cooperate with the Chavistas after all this? It's kind of funny because you see a lot of the pro-regime change people wanted Machado installed, the woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize, but Trump said, she doesn't really have the support inside Venezuela. So it seems like, again, if we're to take Trump at his word, he's basically saying he's going to work with the government that remains in place after plucking Maduro out of there.
So, Dave, what did you make of that? So, Trump gives this address, and during his address, he doesn't even mention the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize winner, who really was a big part of the U.S. propaganda push with Venezuela, to the extent that there was a big propaganda push. They were putting her out there endorsing U.S. military action against Venezuela, endorsing U.S. sanctions on Venezuela. And then in the question and answer portion of the presser, Trump is asked by a reporter about Maria Machado, and he says she's a very nice lady, but she's not very popular, which is, basically his way of saying you're fired. You're never going to be president of Venezuela. What did you make of that?
Maybe they have maybe that's what the U.S. intelligence says, is that she's not actually popular and installing her wouldn't really work out. I don't know. I saw some reporting that her leaving the country to get the Nobel Peace Prize played a factor in it, that apparently some people didn't like that she did that. But you're right that she was all along on the propaganda, the whole time, and praising Trump. I think she even suggested that she would give her Nobel Peace Prize to him. And then he comes out and says, she doesn't, we can't put her in.
Right. So one of the things that's been really hard to puzzle out, Dave, is why Trump decided to do this. And, he talks about the drug boats, but again, I think everybody knows that Trump is just kind of lying about the drug boats. He's saying that each drug boat is carrying enough drugs to kill 25,000 Americans. Well, we've destroyed 35 of them at this point, and there's only 75,000 dead Americans from narcotics overall. And so even if every single dead American was dying from boats coming from Venezuela, then, we've blown up more than 3 boats. So his math simply doesn't work there. What do you think was the reason that Donald Trump went ahead and authorized this move?
Well, it does seem like Marco Rubio and the faction that he represents was what drove this. Apparently, Stephen Miller was very into it for his own reasons. And I think they convinced Trump with the oil because that's what Trump is saying it's all about, basically. He mentions the drugs in his press conference, but he's making it very clear that his reasoning for doing this is the oil. And, obviously Maduro, he's someone the U.S. wanted to take out for a long time. Same thing with Chavez. And I think this is the new, Trump doctrine that he's trying to impose here, basically that the U.S. can do whatever it wants, not just in its own hemisphere, but also around the world. He's threatening another war with Iran and everything.
Absolutely.
And I think he's just become, this is his thing now. He thinks he could just launch these quick military operations and he won't have much blowback.
So I have this clip of Marco Rubio talking about the oil issue at the press conference on Saturday.
We don't need Venezuela's oil. We have plenty of oil in the United States. What we're not going to allow is for the oil industry in Venezuela to be controlled by adversaries of the United States. You have to understand, why does China need their oil? Why does Russia need their oil? Why does Iran need their oil? They're not even in this continent. This is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States. They are not going to come from outside of our hemisphere, destabilize our region in our own backyard, and us have to pay the price for it. Not under President Trump.
So, so Dave, I'm really curious here as to this idea that this is a war for the oil because Maduro agreed to work with the US on the oil. And I would assume that Maduro agreeing to work with the US, maybe they're not going to get as good of a deal as if they go in and just put in their own government, but that comes with an amount of stability. The guy's been there a long time. He says he's willing to work with you. You're not running the risk of regime change and massive civil war, other catastrophes breaking out in Venezuela. So, do you think that this actually will be like a war for oil where we go in and we try to develop the oil resources? I mean, didn't we try to do this in the Middle East and in Iraq, and it doesn't seem to have been very profitable?
Yeah. Well, the thing is that it, everything they're saying like doesn't actually make sense. They're contradicting themselves in like so many different ways. All the different Trump administration officials. As I said, I do think that's like Trump's idea is let's get in there and really get the oil. But for Rubio, obviously this was about something else. Obviously, there's the Iran and Russia and China connection. But again, apparently Maduro was willing to not cut ties, but lessen his relationship with those countries. What's really funny about it, again, what Rubio, I'm getting them mixed up. What Rubio said contradicts President Trump. He said, we're going to get the oil, we're going to get in there and rebuild it. And someone asked him, what about China? China buys a lot of oil from Venezuela. And he says, oh, don't worry. They're going to keep getting their oil. Don't worry about that. We're going to make sure they get their oil too. So like that kind of throws out the whole narrative that this was a war to take away oil from China. And then you also have Trump, so Rubio, this is another thing. Like it's very insulting to our intelligence, all these things that they say. At this press conference, Rubio says, oh, we gave Maduro plenty of opportunities to negotiate. He said, this is the president of peace we're talking about here, like referring to Trump. In an interview the same day, Trump said, oh, Maduro wanted to keep negotiating, but I said, no, that's it. That's enough. He's got to go. So for whatever reason, Trump was convinced that Maduro had to go, even though, there was that option. And at the same time, he seems, if we're going to believe what he's saying, willing to work with the same government that Maduro was a part of. So I don't know what to make. I mean, it's all very kind of confusing, and I think that's intentional. I think that's a big part of Trump's whole thing is he throws all this stuff out there. If you read the indictment against Maduro, it's allegations of cocaine trafficking and allegations that they possess machine guns in violation of U.S. gun laws. I don't know how you can justify kidnapping a foreign head of state to put them up on gun charges in the U.S. But the word fentanyl, fentanyl's not in there, even though Trump was claiming that they were bombing the boats because of fentanyl. And he also pardoned the former Honduran president who was convicted in a U.S. court of trafficking cocaine to the U.S. So the whole thing, they're just lying and throwing whatever they can out there. So what's the real motive? Why did they take out Maduro? I think another part, and you probably have more insight on this than me, but I do think one part of it is that they did it because they can, because they want to start this new Monroe Doctrine, which is complete perversion of what the original Monroe Doctrine was. Basically showing that we can do whatever we want in our hemisphere. Now he's threatening the president of Colombia. I think initially they wanted to bomb cartels in Mexico, but then they realized that's probably a bad idea to do that against the will of the Mexican government. So let's just go after Venezuela, even though they're a relatively minor player when it comes to the cocaine coming to the U.S.
That's a great point, Dave. Now, there was this other kind of theory or thing put forward, and this was in the New York Times, the article, how Trump fits on a Maduro loyalist as Venezuela's new leader. And this is, I'm not even joking, the opening sentence of this article. It was one dance move too many for Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The article writes, in Mr. Maduro's regular public dancing and other displays of nonchalance in recent weeks helped persuade some on the Trump team that the Venezuelan president was mocking them and trying to call what he believed to be a bluff, according to two of the people who spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to talk about the confidential discussions. So the White House decided to follow through on its military threats. Dave, what do you think the chances are that Trump viewed a dancing Maduro as mocking him and authorized this operation for that reason? Again, this is in the New York Times.
I think it's possible because Maduro was, essentially seemed to be calling his bluff. He was quiet about the CIA, the alleged CIA drone strike that took place in Venezuela. We still don't even know what happened there. That's kind of been overshadowed by all of this. But yeah, he was not expressing any kind of fear from the U.S. So yeah, I think that was probably a factor. It seemed like for a few weeks now they were ready to go. I think Trump initially said they were going to do this on Christmas. I mean, attacking a Catholic country on Christmas. I mean, it's just crazy. But he decided to bomb Nigeria that day instead. But yeah, I mean, I think the idea that they're saying, all right, he's not taking us seriously. Let's go in. And I guess they thought they could pull off this operation, which they did.
So, Dave, I am wondering if this means we need to kind of recalculate how we look at Trump administration too. I think in the first administration, a lot of people looked at his first 2 years with North Korea, where the first year it's fire and fury, Kim's little rocket man. But then I think a lot of people came to the idea that Donald Trump was really engaging what he believes is the art of the deal, where he made the threats in order to bring the North Koreans to the table, where he almost did get a deal. I'm being generous with the word almost, but they were engaged in serious negotiations, and there was a real chance of moving in the right direction between North Korea, South Korea, and the United States during Trump's first administration. But this time around, he's making a lot of threats, and he seems to feel bound to follow through on them. He bombed Nigeria on Christmas Day. He's now kidnapped Maduro. He's bombed Iran. What do you kind of make of Donald Trump's second administration war policy?
Yeah, no, it is different because that's something a lot of his supporters were saying early on in this administration is, oh, he's just bluffing to make a deal. But then he followed through on his threat with the war in Iran and now, as you mentioned, Nigeria and now Venezuela. And I think Trump's really riding high right now. I wouldn't be surprised if we see another attack on Iran within like the next few days or weeks. I think Israel, they're threatening Iran, saying, you guys are next. And I think they got Trump's all primed up for them to say, all right, let's go in now. We're seeing these reports that apparently the Ayatollah is considering fleeing Iran, which I find very hard to believe that an 86-year-old, religious ruler is going to flee because there's protests in his country that don't really seem bigger than ones that have happened before. So I think they're really pushing for this, and I think there's a chance that we might see some sort of attack on Iran with the goal of regime change.
Yeah,
or just killing, the Ayatollah, just taking out the top leaders.
You would have to imagine that in Havana, in Tehran, in Pyongyang, there has to be a very heightened level of concern right now. It's just exactly what Trump would do when he seems to be lashing out everywhere. Now, we've been talking about the Middle East here a little bit, Dave, and a lot of people are trying to make an Israeli connection to the U.S. raid against Maduro. Of course, Trump met with Benjamin Netanyahu in the days leading up to the raid. Certainly, it would have had to have been on his mind that he's about to launch this major attack on Venezuela and kidnap the president. No idea if he talked about with Maduro, but Israel does often argue that Venezuela presents a problem because of their business with Iran and their ties to Hezbollah. Then immediately after the raid, the capture, kidnapping of Maduro, Netanyahu tweets out his support for it. And then Mike Huckabee, our ambassador to Israel, or maybe the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., had this to say.
Well, my first reaction, Rob, was to say, praise the Lord and thank you, President Trump. A lot of people may not make the connection as to why this matters to us in the Middle East. What they don't know is that Hezbollah is very active in Venezuela. The ties are deep, and Hezbollah operates in 12 different countries throughout South America. It is not just a threat in the Western Hemisphere. It is a threat to the Middle East. So for the president to go after Venezuela not only deals with narco-terrorism and the many deaths of Americans who are killed by the poison of drugs, it is going to make life for those of us living in the Middle East much better, much safer to take Maduro out, to recognize that Hezbollah is active here. targeting not just Jewish people in all over South America, but using those tentacles to ultimately reach into the United States. This is good news for America, good news for the world.
So, Dave, I see a lot of speculation that maybe Netanyahu told Trump to go ahead with this attack. I guess, what do you make of the Israeli connection overall, and if Netanyahu encouraged this?
Yeah, well, it's funny how, I mean, Huckabee is literally speaking as a resident of Israel there. He said, those of us who live in the Middle East, like you're an American ambassador on a, post in a foreign country. But anyway, I think Israel, I'm sure they support this. It seems like they do. Were they the ones that said, gave Trump the green light? I don't think that, but I'm sure that they supported it. We recently saw Milei in Argentina announce the Isaac Accords. They're going to increase their relations with Israel, and it's something they're going to try to expand in Latin America. And, of course, this is part of the whole propaganda with Venezuela. We saw Machado, big fan of Netanyahu. She was saying she would establish relations with Israel. So I think it's connected, and I think Netanyahu is probably happy about it because Trump is showing that he's willing to conduct a military operation like that. I'm sure Netanyahu got some assurances that it wouldn't impact U.S. military aid to Israel. One thing, we talk about this war with Iran. We haven't seen any major aircraft carrier deployments to the Middle East, although I guess the U.S. just has missile interceptors in Israel now. But, you have this, that I'm sure that was a concern of Netanyahu, this whole buildup in the Caribbean, that they're going to lose some U.S. assets in the Middle East. But I'm sure Trump assured him that he would still back him with Iran.
There has to be, at some point, Dave, there has to be some just logistical constraints, right? They only have so many THAAD interceptors. I think it's in the teens, the number they have. They only have so many Patriot missiles, the interceptors, and particularly the SM-6 missiles, the ones on the ships. And, if you are going to attack Iran, you probably want at least an aircraft carrier strike group in the region, a couple of attack submarines. Deploying all that to the Caribbean, I would imagine there has to be at least some concern in Tel Aviv that, hey, this pipeline of U.S. weapons, it could get diverted to the American hemisphere.
Yeah. I mean, they have a lot of warships there. I forget the exact number now, but it's something like 8. And they played a big part in intercepting Iranian missiles. And of course, if Israel is planning to restart, the full-scale bombing campaign in Gaza, then they're probably going to face more attacks from Yemen, and they're going to want some U.S. warships in the Red Sea. I'm sure that's a concern. But on the other hand, I do see Netanyahu and them seeing this as okay, Trump's showing that maybe he could do some kind of extraction operation against the Ayatollah if we, hit the air defenses hard enough. Of course, he's taking a huge risk with Iran's missiles. I mean, we really could see them pound U.S. bases and Israel in another war.
Dave, other than, concerns, or ties to the Middle East and all of this, I do want to talk about Cuba because I am very concerned that regime change in Caracas wasn't necessarily about Venezuela, that was about Cuba. And this is what Lindsey Graham had to say.
We talked about a drug caliphate in our backyard. We had Venezuela, we have Cuba, we have Colombia in our backyard. And these 3 countries have been condemned ever since I've been in politics. He's going to clear our backyard of a drug caliphate, countries run by narco-terrorist dictators who murder, rape, send drugs into our country to kill thousands of our citizens. When bin Laden went down, I was the first to applaud President Obama. And as to this commander-in-chief, he did something people talked about doing. You just wait for Cuba. Their days are numbered. We're going to wake up one day, I hope in 26, in our backyard, we're going to have allies in these countries doing business with America, not narco-terrorist dictators killing Americans. This is a big frigging day. And everybody in the world is thinking differently than they were just a few days ago because of what you did.
Well, Dave, whenever Lindsey Graham is that happy, I think we should all be a little bit terrified. Just wondering if you think we are moving towards regime change with Cuba or some sort of action against Cuba.
Yeah, if you saw what Trump said when he was asked about that on Air Force One there, he said, "Oh, I don't think we have to do anything in Cuba. They're going to fall now because they're losing their access to Venezuelan oil." So he's, it's something they've been saying about Cuba for decades, that, oh, U.S. sanctions and the embargo they're going to take down the government. Of course, they still stand there. And then, but, Marco Rubio, I forget his exact words, but he essentially threatened Cuba. He said, oh, they better watch out. And this is, when we talk about this political faction, Cuban Americans, Venezuelan, they view this as all connected, that taking out Maduro is the first step toward taking out the government in Cuba. And then what Lindsey Graham's talking about there, I mean, he invented this new term, drug caliphate. He's talking about Colombia. Like, the whole Colombia thing is very absurd because Colombia is a U.S. ally. The U.S. has, that's where all most of the world's cocaine is made, but the U.S. has worked with the Colombian government very closely for a long time. And now they're saying that the president of the country, if they take him out, that's going to somehow affect things. But he's going to be out in August. His term's going to be up, and then they're going to have another election. So, I mean, are you really going to go in and take him out? Like, how would that work? You have U.S. troops work very closely with Colombia's security forces. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So I'm hoping that that's bluster. But Cuba, certainly some concerns here because, Trump, I could see him being like, well, Cuba's so close. And he's like a Florida man himself. You could look at the map and say, man, it's right there. Why don't we just go grab it? I could see him doing that. And, they're talking about Greenland and all this stuff. So to me, it seems like he's just completely out of control.
I could see Marco Rubio bringing Donald Trump mock-ups of beach resorts with golf courses in Cuba and saying, Mr. President, you could take a short boat trip on a yacht. We'll call it South Florida and play some nice golf on beaches out in the Caribbean and have a nice time. I do wonder with Colombia if they're going to try kind of what they did in, I believe, Honduras and Argentina, to just either intimidate the people of that country or try to bribe the people of that country to pick a different candidate in the upcoming election and get rid of the leadership that way. But either way, Dave, it looks like we are going to stay very busy at antiwar.com in 2026. I expect you are going to be talking a lot on the show this year, hopefully occasionally with some good, but at the very least, I'm happy to have you to help us break down all the bad news and get a real take on all of this. So, Dave, I'll let you get back to your family, but thank you so much for your time today, and we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me, Kyle.